The first thing people noticed was a scream cutting through the quiet hospital corridor. It wasn't loud, but it was raw, the kind that comes from someone who has already begged every door to open and found them all closed. "Please help me," the maid cried, clutching a small bundle to her chest. "He is burning with fever." Nurses turned their heads. A few slowed their steps, but no one moved fast enough. In a place where emergencies happened every hour, pain had a way of blending into the walls. She looked out of place there. Her clothes were simple and worn, her hands rough from years of cleaning floors that never stayed clean for long. Sweat lined her forehead, not just from fear, but from the long walk she had taken in the middle of the night, carrying the child as his breathing grew weaker against her chest. Every step echoed with one thought. She could not lose him. Not like this. The child's face was flushed, his small body trembling despite the blanket wrapped tightly around him. His eyes barely open now. Each shallow breath felt like a warning. She whispered his name again and again, hoping the sound of her voice might keep him here just a little longer. Around her, the hospital lights glared too bright, the smell of antiseptic too sharp, as if the world had suddenly become cold and unfamiliar. That was when the doors at the end of the hallway opened. Conversation stopped. A man walked in with calm, steady steps, his presence quiet but commanding. He was known there, not just as a doctor, but as a billionaire doctor, a man whose name was spoken with respect in medical journals and boardrooms alike. People said he had saved lives no one else could. They also said he never let emotions cloud his judgment. The maid didn't know any of that. All she saw was a doctor, and in that moment, he was her last hope. She rushed toward him, her voice breaking as she repeated her plea. "Please help me. He's burning with fever. I don't have anyone else." Her knees nearly gave way as she spoke, the weight of exhaustion finally catching up to her. For a brief second, the world seemed to pause, waiting for his response. The doctor looked down at the child. His expression didn't change. No rush, no visible concern. The hallway felt suddenly too quiet, every heartbeat loud in her ears. Nurses waited for his instructions. The maid waited for mercy. Then he spoke. His words were calm, controlled, and they froze everyone in place. The maid felt the blood drain from her face as she realized this was not the answer she had been praying for. Whatever he had just said carried a weight that promised consequences far bigger than a simple fever. As the child stirred weakly in her arms and the doctor turned away, one question hung in the air, unanswered and heavy. Was this the moment her hope ended? Or the moment a buried truth was about to change all their lives forever? The maid stood there, frozen, as the doctor's words echoed in her mind. He had asked for the child's name, his age, and where she had come from, but there was something in his tone that made her heart pound harder. It wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. She tightened her grip on the boy, as if someone might take him away the moment she loosened her arms. Her name was Aisha. For years, she had worked in a large house on the edge of the city, cleaning rooms she was never meant to rest in. The child in her arms, little Sammy, was not her own by blood, but he was her world. She had found him 3 years ago, abandoned near the servants' quarters on a cold morning, crying until his voice was hoarse. No one had come back for him. No one had asked questions. And so she had stayed silent too, raising him quietly, loving him fiercely, always afraid of the day someone would notice. The fever had started that afternoon. At first, she told herself it was nothing. Children get sick. But as the hours passed, his skin grew hotter, his eyes duller, his small hands weak against her chest. The local clinic had turned her away when she admitted she had no papers, no official guardianship. That was when she decided to walk to the city hospital, even though she knew what kind of place it was for people like her. The billionaire doctor listened as she spoke, his eyes never leaving the child. He asked when the fever began, whether the boy had eaten, whether he had been sick before. His questions were precise, almost too careful. When Aisha mentioned where she worked, something shifted in his gaze, a flicker so quick she almost missed it. Around them, the hospital moved on. Stretchers rolled by. Phones rang. Life continued, indifferent to the small drama unfolding in the hallway. A nurse whispered something to another staff member, casting a quick look at Aisha and the child. The maid felt exposed, as if every secret she had buried was suddenly visible under the bright lights. The doctor finally gestured for them to follow him, but his face remained unreadable. As they walked, Aisha noticed the way people stepped aside for him, the way doors opened without question. Power followed him effortlessly. She wondered what kind of man he was outside these walls, and why her chest felt so tight in his presence. Inside a small examination room, he paused and turned to her. "You said no one else knows about this child," he said quietly. It wasn't an accusation, but it felt like one. Aisha nodded, tears filling her eyes. She had lived in fear for years, always waiting for this moment, when loving a child might cost her everything. The doctor looked at Sammy again, his jaw tightening slightly. For the first time, his calm seemed strained, as if a memory had been stirred that refused to stay buried. He reached out, then stopped himself, his hand hovering in the air. Outside the room, footsteps approached, voices calling his name, asking for him urgently. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow breath, as though standing at the edge of a decision that could not be undone. Aisha watched him, her heart racing, knowing that whatever he chose next would change their lives forever, but she had no idea whether that change would save her child or tear them apart. The doctor finally stepped out of the room, closing the door behind him just enough to keep Aisha and the child inside. From the other side, she could hear his voice drop lower, controlled but firm, as he spoke to staff. Names were mentioned, departments, a request for privacy that didn't sound like a request at all. Aisha sat on the edge of the examination bed, rocking Sammy gently as his breathing remained shallow and uneven. Every second felt stretched thin, like something fragile about to snap. She had never imagined being here, surrounded by machines she didn't understand and rules she had never been allowed to learn. Her whole life had been about staying unnoticed. In the mansion where she worked, she moved like a shadow, cleaning up after people who barely remembered her name. But tonight, she was visible in a way that terrified her. The hospital, the doctor, the questions. It all felt like a spotlight she couldn't escape. When the doctor returned, he wasn't alone. A senior nurse followed him, her expression cautious, her eyes lingering on the child. They spoke in medical terms Aisha couldn't follow, words about fever, tests, and observation. But beneath it all, Aisha sensed something else, something unspoken. The doctor kept glancing at Sammy's face, as if searching for answers written there. What Aisha didn't know was that the doctor's calm was beginning to crack. Years ago, long before his success, before the wealth and recognition, there had been a child with the same eyes, the same faint mark near the ear. A child he had lost in a chapter of his life no one knew about. He had buried that memory under long hours, achievements, and silence. Seeing Sammy now had dragged it back into the light. Down the corridor, a hospital administrator watched the situation unfold with interest. A poor maid, an undocumented child, and the hospital's most powerful doctor personally involved. It was a kind of complication institutions hated. Rules existed for a reason, and exceptions had consequences. Phones buzzed quietly as whispers began to spread. Back in the room, Aisha noticed the doctor hesitate before ordering further care. His authority was clear, but so was his inner conflict. She wanted to ask him what was wrong, to beg him not to turn them away, but fear sealed her lips. She had learned long ago that too many words could be dangerous. The nurse adjusted the blanket around Sammy and checked his temperature again, her brow furrowing slightly. She didn't say anything, but the look was enough to make Aisha's heart race. She reached out and brushed Sammy's damp hair back, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Outside, the sound of hurried footsteps grew louder. Someone important was coming, someone who would ask questions Aisha couldn't answer. The doctor straightened, his face settling back into a mass of control, but his eyes lingered on the child one more time. Aisha felt it then, the sense that this night was no longer just about a fever or a hospital visit. Something deeper was unfolding, something tied to secrets, power, and a past that refused to stay hidden. As the door began to open again, she held Sammy closer, unaware that the truth standing just outside could either protect them or take everything away. The door opened wider, and two people stepped in, their presence changing the air in the room instantly. One was a hospital administrator, calm but sharp-eyed, already assessing the situation as a problem to be managed. The other was a security officer who stayed near the door, silent but alert. Aisha felt her stomach tighten. She had seen that look before in the mansion, when trouble was about to find someone small and powerless. The administrator spoke politely, but there was distance in his voice as he asked about the child. His tone shifted when Aisha admitted, again, that she had no documents, no birth record, no legal proof that the boy belonged to her in any way. Each word felt like a crack forming beneath her feet. She looked toward the doctor, searching his face for reassurance, but he remained quiet, listening. Sammy stirred in her arms, letting out a faint, restless sound. His skin was still hot, his lashes damp with sweat. Aisha pressed her forehead against his, whispering for him to hold on just a little longer. She could feel people watching, judging, measuring the worth of a life against rules written on paper. The administrator cleared his throat and mentioned protocol, observation limits, legal responsibility, words that sounded harmless but carried heavy consequences. The security officer shifted his weight slightly, and that small movement sent a wave of fear through Aisha. She knew what being escorted out meant. She had lived her whole life avoiding moments like this. The doctor finally spoke, his voice steady but firm. He asked for more time. He insisted on further tests. The room went quiet. Everyone understood what was happening. This was no longer just a medical decision. It was a personal one. The administrator hesitated, clearly weighing the cost of arguing with someone so influential. For a brief moment, Aisha felt hope flicker. But then the administrator's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, his expression tightening. Someone higher up was asking questions now. The hospital's reputation, liability, the rules that protected systems but crushed people like her. The doctor stepped closer to the bed, lowering his voice as he asked Aisha one final question. "Where did you say you found him?" She answered softly, her words trembling. His jaw clenched. The mark near Sammy's ear was clearly visible now, and the doctor couldn't look away from it. A memory pressed against his chest, heavy and painful, threatening to surface. Outside the room, voices grew louder. More staff had gathered. The situation was slipping beyond control. Aisha felt tears spill down her cheeks, not loud, not dramatic, just silent fear. She knew she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't see clearly, something that could either save her child or take him from her forever. The doctor straightened, his decision not yet spoken but clearly forming. The administrator waited, impatient now. The security officer's hand hovered near his radio. Sammy's breathing hitched again, shallow and uneven. Time felt cruel in that moment. Every heartbeat stretched. Every second mattered. And as the doctor opened his mouth to speak, Aisha realized that whatever he said next would change everything. But the answer everyone feared or hoped for had not yet been revealed. The doctor's words were interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. Everyone turned at once. A woman stepped inside, dressed in an expensive coat that didn't belong in a hospital hallway at this hour. Her posture was stiff, her eyes alert, scanning the room until they landed on the child in Aisha's arms. For a split second, something close to shock crossed her face before she masked it. She introduced herself as a representative of the household where Aisha worked. The mansion had noticed she was missing. Someone had followed the trail. Aisha's heart sank. The one place she believed she could hide had found her anyway. The woman's gaze moved to the doctor, and her tone changed instantly, respectful, almost careful. Names were exchanged. The doctor stiffened when he heard the name of the family she served. It was a name that carried weight in the city, tied to power, wealth, and old influence. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. The woman explained calmly that the child did not belong to Aisha, that there were questions about where he had come from, that certain matters were better handled quietly. Her words were smooth, practiced, but beneath them was a warning. This was no longer just about hospital policy or medical care. This was about control. Aisha shook her head, clutching Sammy tighter, as fear turned into desperation. She tried to speak, to explain, but her voice broke. The administrator listened closely, his attention clearly shifting. The presence of wealth changed everything. Protocol bent easily in its direction. The doctor watched the exchange, his eyes narrowing. The mark near Sammy's ear was unmistakable now. And the timing, the location, the household, it all collided in his mind. A truth he had buried for years began pushing its way to the surface, refusing to stay silent. He asked the woman a simple question about the child's history. She hesitated, just for a second too long. That hesitation was enough. The doctor's calm facade cracked, replaced by something sharper, more dangerous. He realized this fever had uncovered more than an illness. It had exposed a secret someone powerful had worked hard to hide. Outside the room, security increased. Phones rang. Decisions were being made, without Aisha's voice included. Sammy whimpered softly, his small body trembling, unaware of the battle forming around him. The doctor stepped between Aisha and the others, his presence sudden and commanding. It was the first time he had physically placed himself in the conflict. The administrator frowned. The woman's eyes hardened. Aisha felt the shift immediately. This was no longer just her fight, but she also sensed the risk. Whatever the doctor suspected, whatever truth he was inching toward, it could put them all in danger. As another staff member rushed in with urgent news about the child's condition worsening, the room plunged into chaos. The woman reached for her phone. The administrator called for clearance. The doctor stood his ground, torn between duty, memory, and something deeply personal. And in that moment, as Sammy's fever spiked and the walls closed in, one terrifying thought echoed in Aisha's mind. What if the truth that could save her child was the very thing that powerful people would do anything to keep buried? The doctor finally raised his voice, and the room fell silent. It wasn't loud, but it carried authority that no one dared challenge. He ordered immediate treatment, not as a suggestion but as a command, listing steps and instructions with sharp clarity. Nurses moved at once. Machines were prepared. The administrator opened his mouth to object, then stopped. Everyone knew this doctor's reputation. When he spoke like that, lives were already being saved. Aisha stepped back as Sammy was gently taken from her arms. Panic surged through her, but the doctor met her eyes and gave a small, firm nod. "He's not leaving this room," he said quietly. "Not tonight." That was all she needed to hear to keep herself standing. As treatment began, the woman from the mansion tried one last time to assert control, reminding everyone of influence, of consequences. The doctor turned to her slowly, his expression cold. He spoke a name from the past, one no one else in the room recognized, but that made the woman's face drain of color. He mentioned a private case, years ago, quietly buried, involving a child taken away under questionable circumstances. The administrator stiffened. This was no longer something that could be brushed aside. Test results began to come in, one after another, confirming the doctor's suspicions. The fever had a cause treatable, but had also revealed something deeper. The mark near Sammy's ear wasn't random. It matched medical records the doctor had never forgotten, records tied to a loss that had shaped his entire life. Aisha listened, confused, as fragments of truth surfaced. The doctor spoke slowly now, each word heavy. Years ago, a child had been declared gone after a quiet settlement and a sealed file. That child had never truly disappeared. He had been hidden. The woman tried to interrupt, but it was too late. The administrator realized the weight of what was being uncovered and stepped back, already thinking of damage control. Power shifted in the room, unmistakably. Sammy's breathing began to steady as the treatment took effect. Color slowly returned to his face. Aisha let out a sob she hadn't realized she was holding, sinking into a chair as relief washed over her. For the first time that night, hope felt real. The doctor approached her, his voice softer than before. He told her the truth, not all of it, but enough. Sammy was safe. No one would take him away. Not now. Not ever. What mattered was that the child would live. But just as the room began to calm, just as Aisha believed the worst was over, a final detail surfaced. A nurse quietly handed the doctor another report, one that hadn't been reviewed yet. His expression shifted again, subtle but unmistakable. He looked at Aisha, then back at the child, and realized something that changed everything once more. Sammy wasn't just connected to his past. He was connected in a way no one had anticipated. The doctor closed the file slowly, keeping that truth to himself, for now. As the monitors continued their steady rhythm and the powerful stepped back into the shadows, one thing was clear. The fever had saved the child's life, but the secret it uncovered was far from finished. And as Aisha reached out to hold Sammy's small hand again, unaware of the final truth still waiting to be revealed, the story did not end. It only deepened. Morning light slowly filtered through the hospital window, soft and pale, replacing the harsh glow of the night. The machines beside Sammy now hummed steadily, no longer urgent, no longer alarming. His fever had broken. His breathing was calm. For the first time since Aisha had carried him through those doors, she allowed herself to believe he would be okay. The doctor returned quietly, no crowd behind him this time. The administrator was gone. So was the woman from the mansion. Whatever power they had tried to use had faded once the truth surfaced. Official reports were rewritten. Old files were reopened. Some secrets, once exposed to the right light, could not survive. The doctor pulled a chair closer to Aisha and sat down. He spoke gently, without authority or distance. He told her everything. Years ago, a child had been taken from him before he ever knew he was a father. The case had been buried under money and silence. He had searched quietly, hopelessly, until the trail went cold. When he saw Sammy, the resemblance was not coincidence. The mark near his ear was genetic. The records confirmed it. Sammy was a son. Aisha listened in shock, tears streaming freely now. Fear hit her first, the instinctive terror of losing the child she had raised with her whole heart. But the doctor didn't reach to take Sammy away. Instead, he thanked her for saving his child, for loving him when no one else did, for choosing compassion over fear every single day. He made a promise then, not just as a billionaire doctor, but as a father. Aisha would never be cast aside. She would always be part of Sammy's life. Family, he said, wasn't built only by blood, but by sacrifice. Later that day, legal teams arrived, not to threaten, but to protect. Papers were signed. Truths were acknowledged. The mansion that had once loomed over Aisha's life no longer had any claim on her or the child. The people who had hidden Sammy faded quietly into background, their influence dissolved by facts they could no longer control. When Sammy finally opened his eyes fully, weak but smiling, Aisha held his hand and laughed through her tears. The doctor stood beside them, unsure at first, then slowly reaching out. Sammy's fingers curled around his, naturally, without fear. In that small gesture, years of loss found their answer. Weeks later, life looked different. Aisha no longer walked through back doors. Sammy grew stronger each day, his laughter filling spaces once marked by silence. The doctor learned how to be present in ways success had never taught him. And Aisha learned that asking for help was not weakness. It was courage. The story spread quietly, not as gossip, but as inspiration. A poor maid, a sick child, a powerful doctor forced to face his past. It reminded people that humanity mattered more than status, and compassion could rewrite even the darkest chapters. Some nights, Aisha still remembered the fear of that hospital hallway. But now, when she looked at Sammy sleeping peacefully, she knew that one desperate cry for help had changed everything. Because sometimes it takes a burning fever to reveal the truth, and sometimes the answer to a miracle is simply someone choosing to care.